The Leica SL2 has a stunning 47 megapixel sensor. It's built exceptionally well, and I picked this one up for a fraction of its original retail price. Wait a minute. That's not a Leica SL2. That's the Lumix S1R. But according to my notes, this camera looks like it has specs that are identical to the Leica SL2. So why did those still sell for almost 5,000 Australian dollars and I paid just 1,300 Australian dollars for this virtually unused S1R? In today's video, I'd like to talk about this forgotten flagship, the absolute king of depreciation, a camera which is capable of producing jaw-droppingly good images and probably one of the biggest bargains in photography today. But before we begin, be sure to subscribe to see more great photography content. Now, the Lumix S1R was released in 2019, and it was very much intended to be a flagship, a no-holds-barred range topper that was produced as a sister camera to the Leica SL2, born out of the mighty L-mount alliance between Panasonic and Leica. And as I mentioned earlier, it has a stunning 47 megapixel sensor, build quality that is arguably some of the best I've ever seen, and a feature set which makes the dirt cheap price that these can be now found for so much more tantalizing. Now, I had always known of the S1R, so upon its release, I was curious about this camera, but at the time, the limited lens options available for L-mount and horror stories about its autofocus made its 5,200 Australian dollar retail price a tough one to swallow. But 5 years later, having now switched to Lumix with the fantastic S5 II and S5 IIX, and having amassed a bunch of great L-mount glass, when I stumbled upon a virtually unused S1R that had been languishing on Facebook Marketplace for months for a crazy cheap price, I decided to go for it, as I was hankering for more megapixels and resolution for my portrait work, and boy am I glad I did. So, the initial impressions when I took this camera out of the beautiful and quite large box was, wow, this thing is a tank. In every way, the S1R feels like a literal weapon. The body is rock solid, it's very heavy, every button and dial feels properly pro-grade, and compared to the relatively cheap feel of the S5 II, the S1R feels like a proper flagship camera, one that you could use and abuse. It really reminds me of like the Canon 5D Mark III, or just about any of the old school flagship DSLRs with this beautiful, really easy to read top LCD panel and a really super comfortable and ergonomic grip. Then I put it to my eye, and I saw the gorgeous 5.76 million dot OLED viewfinder, which many online consider to still be one of the absolute best on the market. Coincidentally, it's also just as high resolution as the X-H2S, a camera which, despite my negative opinions towards, did indeed have the absolute best viewfinder I'd ever used. Now, this, in comparison to the S5 II with its puny 3.68 million dot viewfinder, makes a noticeable difference, especially when using manual focus lenses with it. And from what I was hearing online, it seems like manual focus was going to be the way forward for this camera, as I had read that the autofocus was apparently totally unusable. Now, I wasn't expecting like great autofocus, as the S1R lacks the excellent phase detect autofocus that the S5 II has, and look, it is not amazing, but it's also not as bad as you might think. So, provided that you're shooting relatively still subjects, the eye detect autofocus with the latest firmware actually works just fine, and I was more than confident using it during a studio shoot, and I ended up with most of my images in focus. Even when trying to use this camera in a dark, dimly lit nightclub, while certainly not as good as the S5 II, the S1R proved to be honestly just fine, if maybe a little bit subpar. Now, Panasonic Australia lent me the excellent 70-300mm f4.5 to 5.6 lens to try out, and I went out and I used it with the S1R to take photos of some birds. And provided the bird was not moving, it got the shot just fine. But yes, obviously, if you're wanting to shoot fast action, this is most certainly not the camera for you. Also, as an aside, that 70-300 is an awesome and fairly compact telephoto lens, and I love the results that I got out of it with the S1R. So thank you, Panasonic, for loaning it to me for a few weeks. I think I'm actually now gonna have to go out and buy one because I'm looking for a sort of 70-200, 70-300 sort of range, and I love the size of that lens, and I love the macro, and it's also got IS, so it's actually really good for video too. And some of the B-roll that you'll be seeing in this video was actually shot with that lens as well, and the S5 II. So I guess that, like, you know, it's a good thing that the manual focus assist on this camera is as bloody good as it is, featuring a very, very crisp and clear punch into zoom feature that is, in my opinion, much better than the S5 IIs. And the focus peaking is excellent, making the S1R the absolute best manual focus experience that I've ever used. And that's what actually makes it really good to use vintage lenses with this. So I've used a bunch of my old Nikon glass, I've used my old Canon rangefinder lenses, and it's just awesome. Like, it really is a very, very good and very easy to use manual focus experience. But the thing that really blew me away was when I popped in the card and I reviewed the images that I'd taken. The sensor in this camera is just a masterpiece. 47 megapixels gives you images that are unbelievably sharp, and the color science, being that, you know, Leica had a considerable hand in the development of this camera, is also sensational. And it's also very easy to edit the files. They look fantastic edited with my Lightroom presets, which if you'd like to check out, I'll link below. Every purchase helps to support me and this channel. But say that 47 megapixels just isn't enough for you. Well, the S1R, like the S5 II, also features a high resolution mode, but unlike the S5 II's puny 96 megapixels, the S1R's high resolution mode can deliver images that are a staggering 187 megapixels. I mean, come on, that's nuts. It's stupid, but it's a lot of resolution. But, you know, unfortunately, unlike the S5 II, the S1R's IBIS is not actually capable of letting you use that mode handheld, so a tripod is necessary if you do wish to use the insanely high resolution mode. But with that said, the IBIS is actually really solid, and I was comfortably getting sharp, hand-holdable images at 1/15 of a second, and when you combine it with lensed IS, like in the 70-300, you get a very solid option for longer telephoto focal lengths. Now, high ISO performance is also no slouch, with 12,800 ISO being totally usable, and the grain when you push it to 25,600 and above has a very natural look to it. And while the S5 II is still definitely the king of low light in my opinion, the S1R still really holds its own, especially given that it's got nearly twice the resolution. Now, other things that I really love about the S1R is that despite it being 5 years old, it still has a lot of quality of life things that people get used to on modern cameras. For example, it's got USB-C charging, which makes it very convenient to use. And one thing that's actually better than on the S5 II is it's got a CF Express Type B slot, which I was not expecting. Technically, it's an XQD slot, but they did make a update which allows it to use CF Express Type B cards. But although also the actual card door is so much better than on the S5 II. It's like this really solid, like, satisfying to open, like, locking switch and stuff. But yeah, you've got a slot for a CF Express card, which is fantastic. Like, you know, this is something that I really dreamt of having on my S5 II, and it actually allows me to finally make use of the cards that I had left over from my XH2S days and enjoy much faster transfer speeds, especially given the size of the RAWs. You know, you kind of want those faster transfer speeds. And also, one of the biggest benefits is you get really fairly responsive playback speed. So if you watch my S5 II review, you may remember that one of my biggest gripes with that camera was the absolutely glacial speed that it displayed photos. Now, thankfully, the S1R doesn't seem to be as slow, which is really rather funny given it's so much older than the S5 II, but I guess that's just one of the benefits of using much faster cards. Now, the screen itself is a tilt-up screen, so, you know, this is really good for photography, and it also folds out as well, like this. But I do wish that this was the S1H screen, which is it's like the sister camera to this that was for video. That had a screen that actually was like articulating and also folded out. I think the GH7 and the GH6 and stuff had that screen as well. It's not the end of the world, but I do think for photography, this screen is really nice. It's definitely a lot nicer than the flip out screen on the S5 II. I mean, this thing can do video, but video is not going to be really part of this review because I didn't buy this camera as a video camera. But one of the benefits, actually, it does have a full-size HDMI port, which is pretty cool. So if you do want to use it for video, I believe it can shoot 4K, up to 4K 60, I think it can. But look, I would not be using this camera for video, especially with its pretty average autofocus too. But that being said, you know, the ergonomics of this camera, like the S5 II, are excellent. All the buttons are in the right place, and it still has that really awesome AF selector switch as well. So you can go from single shot, continuous, or manual, just right under your thumb, which I really love to use as well. And also the larger grip of this camera really makes it, like, if you've got large hands, it's so comfortable to hold this thing in your hand and use it. It's just a joy. Like, it's like, one of the things I loved about the Canon 5D Mark III was just how comfortable and like large that grip was to like hold in your hand. And thankfully this one really, it really brings me back to like that experience of using that camera, which I really, really enjoy. Another thing, which is a tiny detail, but it's something that I really love, and this is something I've never seen on any other camera before, but there's a little light button up here that illuminates the top display. So if you press it, it turns the light on, illuminates it. That's fine. We've seen that before in lots of cameras. However, if you press the button, the back buttons actually turn on as well. Like they're illuminated, which, look, maybe this is like just like not that special, but I don't think I've ever seen any camera do that. And when I first noticed that, it was like, I just smiled, because I was like, that is so cool. It's actually, it uses the sensor as well, the eye cup sensor here. So if the camera is like to your chest and you press that button, the lights will not illuminate. It's just so cool. Like, I love this camera so much, honestly. Like, it's just little things like that, like little details like that just make this camera, and using it is just fantastic, absolutely fantastic. You've also got a lock switch over here as well. So if you want to lock your settings, you can do that too. The S5 II and the 2X don't have that. And that's sort of like a real big pro feature, which I like. And also the top dial has a lock on it as well. So these are all things that, you know, it's just like all my little complaints that I had with the S5 II and my S5 II review, the build quality and all that stuff, have all pretty much been addressed with the flagship camera. And it's really awesome to see that. But this camera is not perfect. There are some downsides, which I'd like to cover. Most notably for me, honestly, the weight of this thing. It is bloody heavy. Like, this thing it weighs 1,020 grams, which is over a kilogram, which is 280 grams heavier than the S5 II's lightweight construction. And while the heavy construction definitely makes the camera feel really excellent in the hand, it also makes it much less suitable for traveling with. And walking around all day with this and like a 24 to 72.8 is an amazing workout in and of itself. So, you know, it's up to you. Like, if you don't mind a weight of a camera, it's great. But for travel, this thing would be maybe a little bit too much for travel. I probably wouldn't want to. This is not the most compact camera in the world. But if you're used to DSLRs, it's probably not too bad. The battery life itself is also pretty average. I got maybe 400 shots per charge, with the camera draining the battery quite quickly, even if it was turned off. Although I did pick up this battery grip here for an extra $100, which makes it even heavier, but at the same time also gives you twice the capacity. This battery grip just has one battery in there as well, and it uses one battery in here too. So then you've got the autofocus, which, look, it's not as terrible as people online seem to make out, but it is definitely nowhere near the speed and accuracy of the S5 II or other options on the market with phase detect. That's definitely something you have to keep in mind. But you have to remember, right? Like, the price at which you can find these for now, like, I understand that 1,300 Australian dollars is definitely on the lower end of what these sell for. It's around about 900 US, I'm pretty sure, last I checked. But I can still easily find them used for like 1,500 to 1,800 bucks in very good condition if you look on Facebook Marketplace. And I'm sure if you look locally to you as well, you'll be able to find them for around that price too. Now, if you compare this to the used prices that other high-resolution flagship cameras from this era sell for, like the Canon R5, for example, or the Sony A7R IV, they still command north of $3,000. And especially if you compare it to the Leica SL2, a camera which is virtually identical to this. Okay, so just real quick, I would like to address the claim that the S1R is basically a Leica SL2. When I say that, what I mean is that the sensor, the autofocus, all that stuff internally that sort of delivers images at least, is the same between those two cameras. There are some very, very subtle differences. So most notably, the SL2 has slightly thinner sensor glass, which is supposed to give you better compatibility with M-mount lenses. Personally, I haven't had any issues at all using M-mount lenses on the S1R, so I don't really know how valid that is. Secondly, the SL2 shoots in a .gng format for RAWs, whereas the S1R shoots in a Panasonic-specific .rw2 format. I've read apparently the image processing can be very, very slightly different for the RAWs, so you may get ever so slightly different colors. But from what I read online, the two cameras are virtually almost the same, to the point where it's like 90% similarity. So if that extra 10% in similarity is worth paying 4 times more, then by all means, the SL2 is definitely worth it. But as it stands, the biggest difference between the two cameras is just in the handling of them. So the UI, the way that it feels in the hand, and the looks of the camera as well. If you look at comparisons between the two cameras, the actual output and the results that you get out of both cameras looks very, very, very similar. So yeah, I just wanted to clear that up. Anyway, back to the video. The SL2 is like $4,500, right? Like more than that. And the S1R, it just becomes like an absolute steal, considering that you're getting all of this performance, build quality, high resolution goodness for how much money? Like, you know, like what Fuji can you buy for $1,300? I'm just thinking, because like, you know, in the world of Fuji's, $1,300 is not even enough to get you, like, you can't even get an X Pro 2 for that kind of money. It's like, it's insane. Like the kind of price to performance ratio that this camera offers is just unmatched. It's absolutely unmatched. And I was a bit skeptical when I got it, because I thought, you know, like, is this going to actually be that good? Am I actually going to get any use out of it? But this has now become my like actual proper photography camera. Like, I use this thing for all my photography, anything that requires high resolution, client work, all that stuff. It's been remarkably reliable. Had absolutely no issues in the 2 or 3 months that I've had it. And I absolutely love it. I honestly can't speak highly enough of it. Now, obviously, look, the R5 and the A7R4 will definitely have superior autofocus performance, and Sony and stuff, you have access to a much greater range of lenses as well. Like now, it's not 2019 anymore, and the L mount definitely has matured to the point where I am comfortable. Like there's no real lenses that I miss from this system, at least. So if you take that out of the consideration, and you look at the gigantic price difference between those cameras and the S1R, I think the S1R is absolutely worth considering, especially if you own an S5 II and you want a like second body for photography. Now, it also makes me very, very excited to see what Panasonic can do with the hopefully soon to release S1R2. So I have a serious soft spot for this line of cameras, and it is somewhat upsetting that people have all but forgotten about just how good this camera is. And its reputation seems to always be overshadowed by its autofocus problems, despite having so many other great positives and being so affordable now. Like, you can find these for so cheap. And I just think like the S1R proves that Panasonic is more than capable of delivering a beastly and high quality photography camera. And I just wish that I still had the 51.4S Pro to try on it. If you haven't seen my review of that lens, that's in my opinion the best 50mm that I've ever tried. Optically, it's flawless pretty much. And I think on this camera, it would have just been a very, very heavy combo, but a very incredible combo as well. So hopefully in the future, I might be able to pick one of those lenses up. Those are still like, you can pick them up for fairly cheap. So I just don't know if I'm like okay with the weight of it. And I think I might want to try the Sigma 51.2 instead, given it's a little bit lighter, and the extra drop of light would actually be quite nice for like club work and stuff too. But to answer my question about why the SL2 costs over 3 times what the S1R does, well, it should be obvious that the Leica name has something to do with that. Now, the SL2 features a different, much more simplified user interface, which to some people may be preferred. And also aesthetically, the SL2 is certainly better looking. No offense, Lumix, but this is, I mean, it's a good looking camera, but I don't know. There's just, I feel like, the SL2, it's a Leica. You can't really compare with that. But internally and functionally, they are basically the same. And I think it stands to say that if you want to try an SL2, but you don't want to spend SL2 money, well, the S1R is the camera to get. Well, that's all for today. Have you ever tried the S1R? Would you consider getting one today? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.